Hi there, welcome to Creating Viable 20-Minute Neighbourhoods, this session with Landor today. I'm Claire Daly, I'm Head of Policy and Communications with Sustrans Scotland, and we have an action-packed morning ahead today. We're going to have a number of sessions, delegates from a range of areas talking about different aspects of 20-minute neighbourhood. We'll get into that very shortly. Just to let you all know that there is a question box. So we'll be covering questions after the presentations are completed. There's 4 presentations going ahead now. And again, just to let you know that there is we're doing an on-demand recording. This event is being recorded. So a recording will be sent to all delegates and it'll also be posted in on YouTube. So just to get started then, I think I will do the first presentation, which is about the policy context for 20-minute neighbourhood in Scotland, where I'm based. So the 20-minute neighbourhood in Scotland, this is something, if we could move to the next slide, please. This is something which is gaining quite a bit of traction in Scotland. Ourselves in Sustrans have been working with the Scottish Government for several years on delivering active cities and towns, and also have worked with the Scottish Government in various other areas. But what was really interesting to see last September in the Scottish Programme for Government was a direct mention of 20-minute neighbourhoods. And this is quite groundbreaking, really, to see that there's an explicit mention in the Programme for Government, and importantly, a commitment of £275 million towards 20-minute neighbourhoods. Basically, the Scottish Government put the 20-minute neighbourhood concept in as a driver to enable people to live better, healthier lives and support Scotland's net zero ambitions. And of course, coming out of the pandemic, this includes the ability to work locally. A recent CIPD survey found that 72% of Scottish employers expect increased demand for home working, and 36% said that they'd be willing to grant these requests. Another third said that they expect new measures, that they would be putting in place new measures to support this, like local work hubs. This also interlinks with planning and development policy to focus on mixed developments and place, people and well-being focused outcomes. And there's a very pragmatic recognition that COVID is having wide-ranging economic impacts. Recovery of community services, small businesses and high streets are an absolute priority, and reimagining urban centres is going to be a really, really important part of this. Now, with transport still remaining as the single largest greenhouse gas emitter in Scotland, as it is throughout the UK, we need a very deep change in how and why people travel. And this is what's going to be necessary to respond to the global climate emergency. And the 20-minute neighbourhood in Scotland is recognised as a framework for all these conversations around planning, transport, health, economic development and housing, and bring them together in a holistic way. If we could have the next slide, please. So we'll have seen a whole range of definitions of the 20-minute neighbourhood. I'm just giving you a snapshot of the Scottish Government definition. We in Sustrans have worked with policymakers in Transport Scotland and also have replied to a range of consultations on Town Centre Action Plan, on the National Planning Framework, which comes up for review in September. There's also a Strategic Transport Projects Review, but I think there's a very nice little definition of a 20-minute neighbourhood. And again, it's great to see that it is actually embedded in national outcomes in Scotland. And basically, the 20-minute neighbourhood is a place designed so that residents can meet the vast majority of their day-to-day needs within a 20-minute walk, approximately 800 metres of their home. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, that was last September. Fast forward to March this year, and again, the Scottish Government had the Planning and Regeneration team had commissioned an organisation called Climate Exchange to do research on 20-minute neighbourhoods in a Scottish context. Now, I'm not going to preempt, I'm sure at some stage they'll be presenting on this soon, but there's some really, really interesting findings and very optimistic findings, one might say, that and their report will be available, and we can send links to that afterwards, but that communities in Scotland actually have the required services and infrastructure that would allow them to be 20-minute neighbourhoods. Now, they did a very bold mapping exercise, but also looked at qualitative aspects. But they did say that it's the case in both urban and rural settlement areas. I think there's a lot of places in the UK that we could say that about too. However, and this is really important, they did say that we can't conclude that the required quantity of services or infrastructure is going to be in place, nor indeed can we conclude that these places are actually performing as 20-minute neighbourhoods. I would add to that that in Sustrans, we're currently going through research on a mapping exercise looking right across Scotland, and we've created, or we're in the process of creating a tool that will allow people put in a postcode, and it comes up on a map as to how 20-minute it is per se. If we could go to the next slide, please. What's interesting here then is that, so we're April, May, just last month, I'm sure a lot of you are avid followers of Scottish politics, but if not, you will probably be aware that we had the Scottish Parliament elections just a few weeks ago. But what is significant is that 3 of the 5 main parties in Holyrood actually had a specific mention of either 20-minute neighbourhood. I think it was 20-minute neighbourhood was in as a policy proposal in the SNP manifesto. For the Scottish Greens, they talked about a 15-minute neighbourhood, and Scottish Labour had an indirect mention to 20 minutes, again, people being able to access everyday needs through within a 20-minute walk. So clearly the policy is getting traction, and just yesterday, the First Minister is sworn in today, and in the coming days we'll have a new government in Scotland led by the Scottish National Party, a minority government which will probably get confidence and supply from the Scottish Greens. But I think the important thing is this concept is going beyond just the main Scottish government. It's being recognised as a concept right across the political piece. So that's all the great stuff about the policy context. I think a lot of people involved here are working in the worlds of transport and planning. So already I am assuming a certain level of familiarity with 20-minute neighbourhood concept. What about the reality though? We have some excellent policies, but here's the reality check. I'm sitting here in Leith in North Edinburgh. I don't know if any of you have been to Edinburgh, but it's a beautiful city. Leith is a little bit to the north of the centre of the city, and some of you will know it if any of you have watched Train Spotting, because that's the area that it was set in. But it's a very mixed, it's the most densely populated part of Scotland. And you can see, this is just my neighbourhood, and I haven't put my address there, but within an 11-minute walk, I have access to a private gym, public gym, work hub, a selection of supermarkets, Sainsbury's, Asda and Aldi just a little bit outside the circle, really good medical centre, churches, community centres, there's even a job centre a little bit further along, a really good library, and a whole range of green spaces and excellent amenities. So this could be called, it's not been designed as a 20-minute neighbourhood, but it could be called a 20-minute neighbourhood. And it's in places with densities like these that the concept is likely to work well. But a lot of us aren't living in 20-minute neighbourhoods. And indeed, before I move on to the next slide, there are parts of the streets to the west are very walkable, others aren't. Go to the suburban picture then, over to Greater Glasgow, where a friend of mine lives. I've put in question marks. There is almost nothing within even a 15-minute walk of Calder-Glen Avenue. Shops, the nearest shop or supermarket is at least a 25-minute walk. There's green space, a small bit of green space within 10 minutes, more within 19 minutes. No work hub, a 37-minute walk, and that's a one-way walk, I should say, not a round trip to medical centre, etc. So this is illustrating the challenge that we have once we get outside the kind of dense urban context. And even, of course, as we know, in an urban context, if a place feels too crowded and we haven't, and we're still allocating space to cars for private cars, then there are all kinds of pressures. And then out in the suburbs, you've got the whole range of challenges with density. So how are we going to retrofit this on? And so if you could go on to the last slide. And so really the question is, what's next? What do we do next? It will become really, really important, really important to look at. It's essentially like a colleague, an urban design colleague described it as being like a jigsaw puzzle where there are a couple of pieces missing, but we have to make them fit. So planning, housing, transport, urban regeneration, rural connectivity, energy use, community development, and access to green space and biodiversity. They're the pieces of the puzzle, and it'll be over to the rest of my presenting colleagues and yourselves. So thank you very much. Okay, now I'll just go off screen. So just over to, so you've been to North Leith and Greater Glasgow, now you're going to Barcelona. So introducing Silvia Casoran Martos from Barcelona.
Good morning, Claire. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting the Municipality of Barcelona to share with you this 20 minutes neighborhood webinar. I will tell you about a little bit about Barcelona and our project about Superilla Barcelona, Barcelona Superblock. I hope it's working now and you are seeing my screen. Well, as you probably know, Barcelona is a very compact city, which is located between the sea and the mountain and two rivers. We are a total of 1.6 million people and in only 100 square kilometers. So our density is one of the highest in Europe. I think it's only Paris is in front of us. Compactness. Barcelona is a very compact city. As you see, our distances are maximum 10 kilometers from one point to the other limit in the city. And then the distances we walk are reachable very easily on foot. But then when we look at cycling possibilities, it's also a very cyclable city because we've got this maximum 10 kilometers, which is maximum 40 minutes cycling. The mixture in our city, we've got 10 districts and 73 barrios or neighborhoods. Each of one of these barrios has a lot of services So most of the people, most of the trips, you don't have to get it from your barrio. As you see here, we've got the administrative services, the nurseries, the primary schools, the secondary schools. They are all spread all around the city, professional education and universities, basic health services, hospitals, pharmacies, public sports center and other sports halls, libraries, theater, cinema, museums, nightlife, which we are missing now very much, parks and playgrounds, markets and shopping malls, elderly care centers, recycling spots, religious and praying centers, community centers, and I miss the one from bars and restaurants, which is the most crowded in Barcelona. Well, so we think we are already a 20-minute city or 20 minutes neighborhoods, but are we a livable city? That's the right question for us. We've got one of the highest car densities in Europe, probably the highest. It's like 3 times the one from London. And this car density is causing, of course, a lot of air pollution problems, noise, use of space, traffic accidents, and climate emergency. These problems were already identified 15 years ago, but we are still coping with them. You see at the picture is Barcelona in this February, so in COVID context, so it should be a clean air, but this is the air we are breathing every day in Barcelona city. We are lucky that we got a Ceuta plan at the 19th century, which was connecting the city center, the old town in Barcelona, with the other old villages in Gracia, in Sants, in Sant Andreu, in Sant Martí, Poblenou. And it was a great plan. This is how Cerdà imagined, with a lot of green areas inside the blocks, also outside the blocks, tramways to connect the city, and then by the end of the century, where there were some bikes and of course also a few cars. But then this is what we got during last century. During 20th century, we got completely urbanized inside blocks and just a few green outside. And this is what we got outside, of course, in all the cities in Europe and in the world. From the 60s, we got mainly cars occupying all the space, all the public space. And you see the inside was totally urbanized. Yeah, and this is what we get still this century, this 21st century. We get this kind of streets crossing the whole city. This is Aragó Street. This is a 5-kilometer street crossing the city center. And it used to be like this. Now we've got a new bike lane since a few months ago here to the right and a new bus lane to the left. But still, it's a real highway crossing the city. And because of all this traffic density, we've got these problems with air pollution. This is the limit from European Union and World Health Organization. And of course, the city center is all suffering from big problems from this. Noise, it's even worse. It's not only city center, but the whole city is having facing a lot of problems with noise. Traffic accidents, this is a heat map. We've got something like more than 10,000 accidents per year. Luckily, not many deaths, 22 in 2019, but we got one boy, for instance, Hugo, of 5-year-old, and this is really unfair. He just died in front of his school, and yeah, we are also facing with this. Yeah, the use of space. In Eixample, in city center, we are having more cars driving through than in the 2 ring roads together. So this is a real big problem because it's so easy to cross the city by car. And of course, climate emergency, all these sectors are doing homework since the 90s, except for transport sector. So this is a real big problem also we are facing, of course, not only the cities, but the whole of the transport sector in Europe. So to reach a livable city, we need just less car traffic, and we need to transform this urban model. And that's what we want. We want superblocks. We want spaces where pedestrians and cyclists are the main users of the public space, and not just cars parked most of the time. How do we get this? Just removing the through traffic. The concept is very simple. Just change some directions in the way that inside some perimeter the traffic is not going through, and that's why how you get this. You can free this space and get new squares of 2,000 square meters each, and then you go from traffic to people. This is one of the streets we changed in Superilla in Poblenou, in Superblock in Poblenou. This is how it looked like. It even didn't have any tree on the sidewalks, and this is how it is now. You see the blue building, it's the same, right? This is a picture of Superilla Sant'Antoni, a new of the squares in Superilla Sant'Antoni. And this is in Superilla Calalie, a green corridor that is now being developed, and it's really amazing how green could be the city. Superilla Barcelona, we are now scaling up the concept of Superilla, not just talking about blocks, but talking about green corridors that are really crossing the whole city. And of course, the main action is located in Eixample area in the city center, where we saw all these environmental problems that are there. I'm taking care of the time. So in Eixample now, we are developing these 21 green corridors and 21 new squares. And we are now defining the street that we want. We are working hard with a lot of people now involved, multidisciplinary, to get to know how is the street that we want, not only the surface, but also underground, how the land must be the best for the trees, for the water cycle, for the energy cycle. And in a few months, we will have the model of the street that we want, and then we will start creating these new corridors in Eixample. Now, a few pictures about Superilla Poblenou, which is the place where I live also. In 2016, we started the experiment or the test with Superblock here in this area. We just removed the through traffic, and then this is how a neighbor that she's an architect, she could draw the situation that we were living here. This is how the street used to be, and this is how it is. We just put some new picnic tables, draws for the kids to play, benches, new trees. Yeah, the picnic tables are the best ever. They are used all the time for all kind of people. Also, tennis tables for young people, they are also really nice. I will go through quite fast. After 1.5 years, we got finally playgrounds in the middle of the streets, in the middle of the new squares that were created thanks to the removing the through traffic. We got 3 of them now in the Superblock in Poblenou. We got new biodiversity also, because we got more green, and then we got new animals. And we've got the place where the most birthday parties are celebrated in the Superblock. Yoga parties, well, any kind of activities. Also, young people are using very much the picnic tables because they can stay in a table outside without drinking or consuming anything. Chess tournaments, cinema, organized cinema and improvised cinema as well. And this is a great place where kids can learn how to roll and also how to cycle. And all people are also using this place. This is the Superblock project is combining both tactical and structural urbanism. And these are ones of the structural measures also to avoid this through traffic. After 4 years, we got Vegetable Gardens, which is the most community engagement experiment ever in the cities, in my opinion, and from my experience. Just the pictures about Superilla Sant'Antoni, about how it was and how it is as well. This is the second one that came after we learned how to improve the Superilla in Poblenou. And you see once more both structural and tactical urbanism measures. Now, all the yellow superblocks are now being asked by the neighborhoods. We've got now a process, a participatory budget process, and many people are demanding new superblocks. These have been voted already, so there were even more. And about the Hugo that was killed by a motorbike in front of his school, we had this program starting 2 years ago then to traffic calm 200 schools of the city, which is only 1/3 of the schools because we've got something like 600 schools. But it's a very ambitious program because by transforming the surroundings of the school, we are really transforming the whole city and creating livable neighborhoods, not only for kids, but for all the neighbors around. Yeah, we are working together. We met with London people to check about the program, the school program, which is really interesting to interchange how are we coping, with all the problems we've got in the cities. And well, thank you very much. I think I'm done with my time, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sylvia. That was really, really fascinating. I'm absolutely dying to go to Barcelona. Just looks amazing, and the super blocks and what you've done, and just those kind of snapshots of well-being brought into a city. I hadn't realized as well about the densities, the car density or the car ownership levels, but really, really interesting, fantastic story of what's going on. So our next speaker is Tim Emery, who's a policy officer with the Town and Country Planning Association. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Claire, and that's brilliant, Sylvia. Thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me and see me. Thanks for having me. And just a quick background to me in the TCPA. So next slide, please. I'm a policy officer at the TCPA, the Town and Country Planning Association, and I hope that many of you on the line are familiar with the TCPA, but if not, we are a small charity that works across the UK with a vision for homes, places and communities in which everyone can thrive. And our mission is to challenge, inspire and support people to create healthy, sustainable and resilient places that are fair for everyone. So a lot of our work includes undertaking research, seeking to influence national policy and providing training and guidance. So next slide, please. So what we're going to go through, so I'm going to introduce you to one of the latest pieces of work which we carried out, which is a guide to the 20-minute neighbourhood, which is aimed at local authority planners in England. I'll highlight some of the cities we've researched to inform the guide. Think again about what we mean by the 20-minute neighbourhood, a set of key principles for making it happen, thinking about some of the tools that we can use as planners, and then to finish, thinking about the changing policy context here in England and some of the challenges. So next slide, please. So the TCPA published this guide to the 20-minute neighbourhood in March this year, which is the result of a joint project funded by Sport England. It's free to download from our website, so please check it out. We worked with a number of different organisations here involved in placemaking, including some local authorities and developers. It is very much an introduction to the 20-minute neighbourhood idea and by no means has all the solutions, and we can talk about some of the challenges a bit later. So next slide, please. So last year when we started researching the 20-minute neighbourhood, there were three areas in particular that stood out for us, which was first being Portland in the USA or Oregon. And Portland actually started looking into the 20-minute neighbourhood way back in 2006 when they began working on their city plan. And the council found that through their community engagement, there was a real interest in making the city more walkable, to improve access to the things that people need, as well as understanding that creating walkable neighbourhoods can actually support their action on climate change. So a particular project that Portland Council undertook was something called their 20-minute Neighbourhood Analysis, and that mapped the accessibility of the city. So you can see here in the map, those white and yellow areas are the most accessible, and then purple and pink least accessible. So they use this data to inform the policies in their plan, and they continue to do so. So one of the key lessons from Portland was really building that evidence base and that mapping. So next slide, please. Next, we have Melbourne, Australia. So we put on a webinar back in October last year where we had colleagues from Melbourne talk about their work, which was really useful. And that recording is still on our website. So again, do check that out. A key message from Melbourne being that the 20-minute neighbourhood, it goes beyond just planning. It is a holistic place-based approach. So it's really that holistic thinking. And in their city plan, the 20-minute neighbourhood is adopted in their planning policy. And a key factor in achieving that was working in partnership with different levels of the councils, different departments, as well as the community. And in Melbourne, they carried out a pilot programme with 3 neighbourhoods in particular, and that really helped shape their work. So next slide, please. Then moving on to Paris and the 15-minute city. So this has really become a centerpiece in Mayor Anne Hidalgo's manifesto. So that strong, vocal, visible political leadership has really been a key factor for Paris. in embedding the 15-minute city idea and aligning their different strategies on climate change, air pollution and inequalities. And there are a number of different projects happening in Paris right now to support the 15-minute city, including things like opening up school playgrounds, similar to Sylvia in Barcelona, for the community to use, and supporting local businesses. And Paris also allocates a lot of their city funding to their participatory budget, which heavily involves the local community in their projects, which is fantastic. So next slide, please. So from our research and talking to different people involved with these projects, we think that the 20-minute neighbourhood is really about creating attractive, interesting, safe and walkable environments where people of all ages and abilities can access the things that they need to use on a day-to-day basis. So in other words, it's all about creating complete and compact connected neighbourhoods. So whether it's 15 minutes, 10 minutes or 20 minutes, we don't think the actual number is really the point. Every place is going to be different, and it's up to each place to decide for themselves what is realistic and what is accessible. And the same can be said for what people should have access to. So we developed this diagram of what we think should be the features of a 20-minute neighbourhood. But again, this will be different for everyone and every place. So next slide, please. And also, we think that the 20-minute is not necessarily a new idea. Having good access to things that you need is just really good placemaking. And we argue that has its roots way back in the Garden City movement, which has been long advocated by the TCPA and its founder since its creation, so over 100 years ago. So next slide, please. So in the guide, we present a series of 10 principles for success. And I won't go through each of them now, but some really important ones include having a compelling vision, which is well communicated. So this has been really key for places like Portland, Melbourne and Paris, and I'm sure Barcelona as well. So having a clear vision with objectives and priorities sort of allows for easy communication between different stakeholders. It helps ensure local buy-in and underpins that sort of coordinated approach. So having a strong vision that kind of helps remind people why they're committed to making the project a success. And thinking about research, data and analysis is also really important. So building that evidence base, identifying the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities and threats for an area will help paint that picture of what the objectives should be. So where are the areas that are less walkable and how can we make this place more walkable? And which communities have the worst health outcomes? So using mapping tools in particular is a really effective way of building that evidence base, and we'll hear from Dan later, who's doing work on this, which is fantastic. So, and then thinking about adopting policy. So as well, having policies in your plans provides that hook to say, this is what we want to be delivered. And without having that mandatory requirement to deliver something, it's really difficult to enforce it. So next slide, please. So thinking about that principle about adopting policy, it kind of links in with the planning tools we can use as planners here. So to support the 20-minute neighbourhood, so we can think about the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework in England, which has hooks to relevant things related to the 20-minute neighbourhood for local authorities to use. And then thinking about the obvious tool that we can use as planners is our local plan. So adopting a vision for the 20-minute neighbourhood and those related policies. And then aligning our local plans with other council tools, thinking about corporate council plans. So having that strong high level buy-in at the top will really strengthen the overall approach. We can also think about supplementary planning documents, neighbourhood plans, and master plan frameworks. So these are all tools where we can embed the 20-minute neighbourhood concept. And the government has also published recently the draft National Model Design Code, which again includes lots of relevant hooks. And in the TCPA guide, we've actually mapped out all these relevant hooks for you to use. But not forgetting also that the 20-minute neighbourhood aligns with many of the UN Sustainability Development Goals, which the UK has signed up to and which we're all supposed to be achieving. So again, that's that international level as well. So next slide, please. Now, it's really easy for me to say, oh yeah, let's use local plans and SPDs, for example, but we are in a very uncertain policy context in England right now at the moment, so it'd be wrong to highlight that. And the Queen's speech last week didn't give us much detail in terms of the planning reforms, other than the government is still really committed to focusing on more housing delivery. And the planning white paper published last year sets out the government's plan to move to a zonal system, as well as things like changes to community participation, so which the TCPA is really deeply concerned about. We also have the recent changes to permitted development rights, which allows commercial properties to be converted into housing, which really risks high streets being defined by really poor quality housing. So please do look at our website to get your head around the reforms and stay up to date, because it is, I appreciate it's very complicated. So next slide, please. So thinking more about the challenges to the 20-minute neighbourhood, need to appreciate the capacity of local authorities right now here in England. So it's particularly after this past year, how stretched, under-resourced, underfunded local authorities are right now, and the capacity of planning teams themselves to deliver the 20-minute neighbourhood. It's a lot easier to draw up plans for the 20-minute neighbourhood if you've got a massive team behind to support you. Again, thinking about policy enforcement and uncertainty. So again, thinking about the planning white paper, permitted development rights. If policy is not in place, then it is really difficult to enforce requirements if they're not mandatory. And then there's also the difference between urban and rural areas, which is something that Claire mentioned earlier. So as well as retrofitting into existing areas compared to building brand new developments, there's a different dynamic there. Investment and funding. So unfortunately, projects are often heavily dependent on investment and funding. And then behaviour change. So you can't force people to walk, cycle and use the bus as much as we want to. Behaviour change takes time. Then we have concerns around gentrification. So improving places can sometimes result in rising prices and potentially displacing people on lower incomes out of the area, which is a real problem. And then finally, concerns around new neighbourhood measures. So sadly, there is often a very vocal minority of residents, often the car lobby, which oppose improvements to walking and cycling because it takes away important space for their cars, which I'm sure Sylvia in Barcelona has experienced. So it's really difficult trying to work with people to make them understand the benefits of creating a more walkable place. Can be tricky. So next slide, please. And that's me. So I appreciate I might have whizzed through that. So thank you. Please do look at our website. There's lots of really useful resources on there. And please do also follow us on Twitter to stay up to date. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Tim. Really, really interesting. It's great to see a whole range of perspectives brought on the topic as well. So last but very definitely not least is Dan Saunders, who's the head of products at Basemap, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about some very interesting and exciting mapping aspects. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Claire. Brilliant talk so far. Let's hope I can keep it up. So next slide, please. So I'm Dan Saunders, I'm head of products at Basemap, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a 20-minute neighbourhood project we've been doing so far this year. For an introduction to Basemap, so we were established just over 20 years ago. We're a software development company who specialises in transportation and mapping. We're experts in managing large public transport data. We provide things like the Travel Line National Data Set that powers many of the journey planners in the UK. And via our track software, we'll be demonstrating today, we've got customers from North America to New Zealand. So there's over 800 users in total, from central governments using it, produce a Scottish Index on National Deprivation, National Journey Time Statistics, to local governments using it for local plans, as Tim mentioned a moment ago, and private sector and the NHS as well. And through the track software, it's been used to look at new transport schemes across the world, such as in Ottawa, the new Queen Elizabeth line, and things like that. So to talk a little bit about the project, next slide, please. So talk a little bit about the project. So we, via our client base, we've seen lots of noises around 20-minute cities, 15-minute cities, 20-minute neighbourhoods. So we decided at the beginning of the year to go about ranking each of the 12 most populous UK cities. So we've got Belfast, not to leave Northern Ireland out, Wales, Scotland and England all included. And we've looked at looking at access across each of these. So we decided to look at schools, so education, hospitals and GPs, supermarkets, and also walking to public transport stops as well. We did consider looking at things like green spaces, employment, libraries, sports centres, and things that we thought would keep it simple to start off with and not try and do all the work for all the cities themselves. But predominantly, it's all really a question about access and showing how accessible each of these cities and neighbourhoods are. Next slide, please. So to do this, using our track software, we loaded in the destination points that I mentioned a moment ago. We created a grid of points that would cover the whole city and all the neighbourhoods within it. We chose 150 metres to get a good spread of points. For some of the destinations, we chose to use public transport data. We used Q4 2020, which was October, that nice little bit between lockdowns. We used the data to send, and we used detailed and accurate road networks and footpath networks. So we used Ordnance Survey's master map highways and paths, which is included for free for lots of the public sector. And when producing a map, a background layer is always important, so we included that as well. Next slide, please. So why do we use track? So our track software can be used to look at a whole city in one go. We can specify different times. So times we're looking at access from and to. We can specify different modes as well. So for some, we can look at just walking, or we can look at buses. We can look at trams where applicable, even ferries if that's applicable as well. And we can look at a holistic view across the whole region to different destination sets. We can take that kind of macro view, looking at everything. This, again, something that Tim mentioned, gives you a good evidence base to start off with. So you can look at how accessible an area is. And then what track allows you to do is edit the data. So we can effectively look at putting in new footpaths, improving footpath access, putting new bus routes in if you wanted to as well. So effectively what we're doing is we're creating a digital version, I guess you could say a digital twin of a city, like a SimCity game, and allowing you to make edits and changes to that. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've got clients all over the world. One of our clients in St. Louis in America was really impressed by track, and this is a quick quote we've got about how access was really important for doing the analysis of looking across the region. Next slide, please. So out of our cities, we're going to delve down into Cardiff and do a bit of a deep dive into that. We've heard some talk about Scotland and England today, so we thought we'd take up the Welsh mantle. Cardiff's quite an interesting place in that it's, got quite an urban centre, but the extremities are quite rural. So you can see this in the maps that are coming across. So on the left, we've got a map showing access to supermarkets. If you can see clearly on the map, we've got some green dots. These are where the supermarkets are located. And then we've got travel time in 10 and 20 minutes. So for this map, we've done it with public transport, so buses, as well as walking. And then what we've done is we've tied in census population data to work out that 97.62% of the population can effectively get to a supermarket. And we can see the areas that are non-accessible or outside of that remit. Again, on the right-hand side, we're looking at access to hospitals and GPs. Again, the blue dots representing these locations and showing 97.5%. So we can see clearly here in a bit of a spot of difference that an area on the left is slightly greater than the area on the right. But actually areas that are covered on the right might have a slightly lower population. So, but actually areas that might show as accessible, not a lot of people live. So that's something always to bear in mind. Next slide, please. We've then looked at access to primary schools. This is looked at using walking, showing that most of the location was within a 10 or 20-minute walk of a location. And then on the second part, we've looked at secondary schools where there's less points, there's less secondary schools in the city, and the bus is quite an important element of getting people to these locations. And we can see that represented the less destination points scheme is only 92% access for secondary schools, whilst on 97% for primary schools. And then on the next slide, we're going to look at access to the stops. So go to the next slide, please. So here we can see crowflies access, which I've seen on a few maps so far. It kind of irks me a little bit. So things like the National Planning Policy Framework, we look at access to public transport stops or bus stops, and we use a crowflies methodology. All this effectively looks at is not using the road network, allowing you to walk over water, through buildings, and so on, but it gives you a much better access score. So here we can see on the left, 400 meters, not using any of the highway or footpath networks. And on the right-hand side, we can see exactly the same calculation done within track, but actually using the footpath network. You can see a much lesser area is covered. And again, when you tie in the population to that, as we see on the next slide, we can see there's a much lesser accessibility score when using the footpath network of only 67%, but actually 87% of the city can get to a bus stop when not using the highway network or the footpath network at all. And I think this is a really important point, trying to say actually when you're looking at these maps, you need to make sure you're using the footpath networks that are available to you. And also you might want to look at safe walking routes. And one of the things you can do within track is remove routes that you don't think are applicable for walking or cycling. Next slide, please. So what can we do if we pick one of our destinations in particular, look at how we can improve access to that location. So looking at secondary schools, what we're now going to do is look at a couple of ways that a city or a region could look at improving access to that. So on the first slide coming up here next, we can see what happens if we just put more destinations in. So if we put more schools in, we've put 2 new schools in, which is quite hard to see at the moment. So hopefully if we click next, we can see a couple of red circles representing where the new destinations have been placed. So we can see to the east and the west of the city, we put 2 new schools in. We've not made any changes to the transportation network at all. We've just put the schools in, and we actually see that there's a minimal effect on the population. So only just over 1.5% more people can now get to a school within the 20-minute cutoff. And that's because I guess these locations aren't very populated. So whilst the contours and the isochrones look to cover a greater distance, the actual reality is not a lot of people live there, so we haven't seen much of an effect at all. On the next slide, what we then start looking at doing is what happens if we edit the network. So we have access to all the public transport information, all the footpath information. And what we can do is start editing the data. So what we did here is we improved some of the bus routes on the city, made them, instead of going into the city centre, going radial around the city to try and improve access that way. We also then improved some of the footpath access around the schools themselves. We put a couple of bridges in and things like that. So if we bring the red circles in, we can see where the improvements are. So we can see areas such as Rumney, Stocklands, the neighbourhood around there, and Pont Prenel. I apologise for that pronunciation in advance. We're seeing greater kind of improvements in access, and that's then being shown by the increase in the population as well. So we see an extra 4% now of the population are able to access a secondary school within 20 minutes. So this is a really good thing to be looking at doing. You know, it doesn't take much time to create these models and look at different changes that can be made as part of it, really kind of helping with the 15 or 20-minute access. Next slide, please. So a little quote here from Cardiff Council. So it's great that, I think it's something that's been mentioned in all the presentations so far, that the concept of a truly accessible city is really at the forefront of lots of planning guidance at the moment. And it's really interesting to see where this will go over the next year. Next slide, please. So we talk about over the next year. So as I said, we're looking at different cities at the moment. So we've done 4 so far. What we've been doing as part of this is looking at the total population of each city. We've then been grading each of the destinations and access scored based on the population. And then we'll be looking at an average. So far, the poorest performer has been Belfast with 84% score, but the best so far has been Birmingham, so good on the Brummies, doing really well there. And Cardiff that we just looked at is 90.5. This is where you can start setting your goals as an organisation, looking at how you might want to improve it. Historically, there used to be accessible transport offices in local authorities that would have access plans over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. So this is the sort of stuff that's historically done. But next slide, please. So as I said, we're doing a monthly blog at the moment. So our next one that's due out in the next week or so, next slide, please, which might be of interest to Claire, is Edinburgh. So we've got a couple of maps here. There's a bit of a preview showing access to some of the destinations to Edinburgh at the moment. Please follow our blog to find out how we're getting on. We're doing a few special blogs as well over the month. So we've got one coming up in Australia as well. I think we're looking at Sydney over this month or next month. And we're always open to having a look at other cities as applicable. And go to the final slide, please. So to kind of summarise, I think software is a really good tool to be using to get that detailed evidence based at the beginning to work out where improvements might need to be made throughout a city or a neighbourhood to try and look at improving access. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dan. That was really, really fascinating. I don't know about all the rest of you, but I always love a good map. I'd love actually if we could get Google Maps to have a 20-minute button, you know, you could just press in the same way as you can do how far things by car, bus, bike, whatever. If you could just press a little button, that would be spit out what you can experience within a 20-minute walk or a 10-minute walk. Okay, we have absolutely loads of questions coming through, and this is where my technical capabilities are limited by so many questions coming in. And I'm just going to go to a few of them, but it's very clear to see that there are themes emerging. So what I'll do is I'll just allocate a couple of questions, and maybe we could put them as discussion points to the panel. Hopefully this first one will be a quick one. It's come up a couple of times. Is it 15-minute neighborhood? Is it 20-minute neighborhood? Is it a 15-minute city? Maybe if anybody would like to kind of share views on that. Sylvia? Why 15 minutes and why not 20 minutes?
I think it's just the walking distance. It doesn't matter. I mean, the distance people are capable and it's reasonable to walk. If the walking path is nice, I think 20 minutes neighborhood is okay. If it's not, then maybe we should go to 20 minutes. No, I think 20 minutes might be too far for a main walking distance, for a daily walking distance, but then it's very easy to cycle. So I think 20 minutes walking, it's just 5 minutes cycling. So it's right.
And just to be clear, Sylvia, as well, and rest of the panelists, as I understand, certainly the way we talk about it in Scotland is it's a 20-minute, and in Sustrans, we certainly talk about a 20-minute return walk, so 10 minutes each way. Is that the way you look at it in Barcelona as well, Sylvia? So 10 minutes one way and 10 minutes back.
No. I was referring the 20 minutes my one-way trip, but I think 20 for us it's like too much. People are generally walking more 15 minutes, like to the metro station or to the supermarket. I think 15 it's already quite okay.
Yeah, Tim, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or Dan.
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's definitely something that's cropped up with the project that we worked on. Everyone was kind of fixating on, is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 15? But it's the idea, it's the vision of just creating more walkable places. And like Sylvia said, it's going to be different for everyone. A 20-minute walk is going to be really difficult if you're elderly or disabled. It's just that general principle, just making places more walkable for everyone. That's the key, really. But in Melbourne, Australia, so they did a lot of research, and 800 meters that's what they decided. So yeah, that 10-minute walk from your home to the shop and then back again. So yeah, a 20-minute round trip. That's what they decided. Yeah.
Great, excellent. Dan, I don't know if you have anything to add. Yeah. If not, we've got billions of other questions.
I just think it sometimes looks at when you're scoping what you want to look at to start off with. So you might say 20 minutes. If you're looking at destinations in your evidence plan, you might say a primary school should be a walk away. But actually, if you're looking at a cinema or something like that, or a gym, maybe that doesn't need to be fit within that scope, and that might fit within a different scope, you know, of being accessible by public transport or something like that. I think it comes back to when you're looking at setting your goals as a region, looking at what destinations you want to keep within that, and then trying to fit that into the end result, basically.
Great, yeah, thanks very much. The question, I'm paraphrasing a whole range of questions in this next one, which is, and it is the big question for all of us, density. What density, at what housing density does 20-minute neighborhood does the concept start to really make sense? And then a related question to that is, how do you get, you know, in lower densities, how do you actually get these 20-minute neighborhood type services in when you have, for example, a suburban area like Blantyre that I showed you? How do we turn that into a 20-minute neighborhood, or can we? Tim, maybe would you like to start with your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can try. Density that is always a key point that comes up, and obviously the higher the density, the easier things are to have access to. So having those compact connected neighbourhoods is a lot easier to provide things within 20-minute neighbour radiuses. And yeah, if much lower densities in the suburbs, it is tricky because you're not going to have those access to those services and facilities. So it's kind of connecting the dots kind of thing and working out where the gaps are, and trying to not necessarily treat every neighbourhood as a bubble, but trying to think about the broader picture about, okay, so my shop isn't 10 minutes away, but where's the closest shop in that to my next sort of suburb? Kind of thinking about that kind of relationship and those transport links. So it's not everywhere, not every neighbourhood is necessarily going to have those accesses, but it's looking at that broader picture. But it's like a specific number, density. That's something we haven't sort of said 30 dwellings per hectare, that kind of thing. We haven't said that in the guide because it's going to be different for everywhere. So yeah.
Okay, Sylvia, any thoughts from your point of view? I would imagine the densities, as you said, are quite high in Barcelona, but is there kind of a minimum, a magic minimum figure in terms of housing density?
I can't tell you a number really, but I can tell you that if in suburban areas and with more low density areas, then we've got the bike also as an very good option for this 20 minutes neighborhood. And then, I mean, there are no limits when you take into the bike as well, I think, I mean, for this concept.
Of course. Okay. Now, then the other theming questions related to that, retail and the future of retail and the future of our town centres. This question came up. What do we have to say, or what do the panel have to say with regard to the future of retail versus going online? You know, and what about the future of retail in city and town centres versus delivery of goods bought online? And I suppose I would extend that question as to what impact does delivery of goods have in terms of livability, walkability, etc. Anyone, Dan, would you like to speculate on that? Or?
Yeah, sure. So I think you could expand out, not just to be, I guess, delivery of goods is quite an important part, but I had to take a GP appointment a while ago, and that was done via video link as opposed to go into the GP. I think actually people's access needs are changing all the time. I think where we were before lockdown, everyone's working differently. People are working, using public transport to go to their workplace so much, or this working from home kind of idea going forwards. So it's a really interesting point. I think, you know, again, looking at different trends is quite an important thing to look at. So a while ago, we did some work in Gloucestershire looking at access to internet and libraries, because people that were in rural locations couldn't access lots of these services because they didn't have access to the internet, and libraries became quite an important community hub for people to go and access the internet with help from staff members. So I think that's quite an important thing to be looking at, is where these trends go, and ensuring that people still have good access to things. With things like home deliveries, I think when you're designing places, you need to make sure there are places where delivery drivers can drop off goods and services and things like that. But we've seen places look at out of hours delivery and things like that as a way of loading up stores and putting stock deliveries and things like that. But it's quite a hard question to kind of cover, because there's so much going on. And actually, if you asked this question 2 years ago, we probably have a completely different answer to where we are now, as people are working and living differently.
Great, thank you for that. Just a couple of questions coming up about the super blocks, superillas, is that right? There was one question about has it caused displacement of traffic to other areas, Sylvia?
Yeah, in the case of Poblenou, which is the oldest one, no, it's almost 5 years old now. The traffic increase was just between 2 and 5% in the perimeter, in the streets around the superblock. So it was really a few amount of cars. In the end, we also had parking regulations So that was also crucial, no, to remove some car parks on the streets, and then the car parking that was left was just for neighbors. So in this way, we avoided also the external visitors that used to come by car to the superblocks area. So it's not only about traffic through traffic, it's also about parking regulations and other policies that go all together. And what we are doing, I mean, we are of course working together with the mobility team with all traffic modeling systems, and we are always like trying to balance, no? Also with the schools projects, we are trying to reduce capacity, especially on main axes, on main roads, because of course they are the most dangerous and the ones that are causing more pollution as well and noise. And yeah, we are discussing always, no, how many car lanes can we reduce in this street and the other one, and we are kind to playing, no, with all this modeling, and we've got like a system that we know where can we reduce one car lane, or where can we do this, and that's, I mean, it's always balancing and always discussing, of course, also because it's, of course, the objective of reducing car traffic, it's there, it's in the mobility plan. We need to reduce more than 20% of car traffic in the next few years. So of course, COVID is helping us also. So that was also a good moment not to take advantage of the situation and reduce the capacity in the street. But we, as you see, we still have big problems in Barcelona city. So we need to be more ambitious to really cope with all the effects from the traffic.
And just related to that, again, a couple of questions I've noticed. Again, was there pushback and vocal opposition to the superblocks, either initially or on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, it was in the case of Poblenou, it was very, very crazy how it started, because the opposition was very, very loud. Also because it started as a pilot with universities. It wasn't like the program that was already defined, no, by the municipality. It was something that showed up suddenly, but then the municipality decided to keep it because it was going in the direction that the municipality wanted to go. But then it was quite hard, but people were like blaming the right to drive through all the streets in Barcelona. Like, is it a right? Really? I mean, we had this kind of discussions, but after the first 2 years were hard, but then after the second year, then the people that were initially against the superblock went to the mayor, for instance, when she came to visit, to tell her that they were so happy now with the superblock, that they were enjoying with their kids every day at the superblock. So people need time to adjust to the changes, and especially when you use tactical urbanism, we see that it's like more people feel more brave to fight against it, because it's like, well, you did it just in one weekend, then remove it and then go back to the previous situation. And of course, when you do the structural urbanism, the hard urbanism, then you are taking a long time, no, working in the streets, and then people realize that there's no way back. But one of the tactical urbanism has this. I mean, it's easier and faster and cheaper, but then you can get also more people against it in the beginning. After a few months, they realize about the new uses that the new space is creating, and then they appreciate it. That's our experience. And the second one in Sant Antoni was a big success from the beginning already. So it's also now people, we see the people from the different neighbors are demanding super blocks at their neighborhood. So
great. Well, I think you've already posted in the chat as well details about how to find out more details about the super block. So I think certainly there'll be a lot of questions coming your way. A question for Dan, and there's a couple of ones for Basecamp. Has any work been done on? Has any work ever been done on a new town, which tends to be kind of more sprawling and car oriented? That's a question from Kay from Crawley Borough Council.
Yes, so certainly. So we've got some of our clients using the software right now to look at new garden towns in Essex. I think there's one being up near Thurrock at the moment. So it's being used effectively to look at that, looking at where new destinations can be placed, plotting in all of the new footpaths, using the master plan of a site, plotting all these locations in, and working out how accessible they are. So yeah, that certainly is something that is done quite a lot within the track software. It's also used a lot even in existing development in a city or the outskirts of a town, when an access plan or an accessibility plan is done. Tracks are used to look at that, looking at, can people walk to a primary school and things like that, because as we found quite a lot of the time, you build this new development and there's an over reliance on cars straight away. So actually trying to make sure that when these new developments are done, brand new developments or within a city block at the moment, making sure that actually people can walk to get to a primary school, people can do other things like that, or the promotion of things like park and stride and things like where maybe it isn't quite as applicable, but trying to promote people not to do that final 10-15 minute drive to the primary school, parking on the outskirts and walking in at the end as well, something we've seen quite a lot of. But certainly track can help provide that evidence that can be used to meet planning guidance and policy framework objectives.
Okay, thanks for that, Dan. And just while you have the mic, so to speak, there was another question came in here about calculating accessibility using track. Does this take into account the time taken to cross busy roads and junctions? For example, will it route via pedestrian crossings, and if cycle time for a crossing is 120 seconds? Will it include half of that time, or?
This really comes on to, certainly. This comes on to, I guess, sometimes the data you put into things. So we can certainly, for example, ensure that you can't cross a road at any position. You can use footpaths of footbridges or anything like that you want to do. So this becomes really important on the major urban roads, like A roads that run through city centres. So you can do that kind of level if you want to. The problem is there's not a lot of viable data that is that kind of granular information, so it requires use to input that in the short term. But it can be done if you want to put the time and effort in. You can certainly do that. I know a lot of work's being done at the moment by Ordnance Survey to try and gather this information and put it out into the public sector geospatial agreement. So as this data becomes more and more applicable, we can start using that in tools like Track to give a more detailed response.
Great, thanks for that. We're going back to Barcelona again, Sylvia. A question about monitoring car ownership from the baseline date when new 20-minute neighbourhoods are implemented. This is from Adrian Davis. That we need to monitor car ownership from the baseline date to see what are the changes over time. Has this been done in Barcelona?
No, we haven't checked the car ownership, but we do the car use. We also have another policy going all together, which is the low emission zone that started last year. So we see that many people that had an old car, they just got rid of it and of the car, and then they didn't get a new one. That's what we are seeing now, especially the young people, but also old people that they had an old car and now they share the car with the family, or we've got also cooperative models of sharing, of car sharing, of electric car sharing, and they are increasing now. And it's like creating a community of sharing car in the superblock. I mean, in my case, for instance, I got rid of my car, of my vehicle last November because of the low emission zone. And now I ask my neighbors to to get their cars when I need one, because most of the cars are 95% of the time really parked. So it's really nice to engage communities also by sharing. I mean, it's not official, it's just something that comes by itself. But I really think that's the future, and also with the superblocks communities, this feeling of community is also helping you to do these things of sharing cars, for instance. But no, we don't have this monitor.
But I'm taking advantage of my position at the chair now at the moment. Kind of a related question would be, are properties being advertised as, this is a 20-minute neighbourhood, this is a low car neighbourhood. In other words, if you want to live here, better leave the car somewhere else, or obviously that would be phrased slightly differently, but I think it's a wider question for housing, because housing that is delivered without cars or car parking while it in some instances could be considered a disadvantage, in many instances it is an advantage, particularly for families or, but I'm just wondering, are there any places where, the likes of super blocks are being built, or colonies in Edinburgh where it is being advertised, this is a low car area and actually this is an advantage? Or are, I don't know if we've any property developers on the call at the moment or on the seminar, but I think it's a question, and I don't know if anybody has noticed it happening anywhere else. Tim, has that come up in any discussions for you?
Yeah, I guess we're starting to realise that we don't need to depend on the car, and I think developers are definitely understanding that as well. So we're not automatically thinking, oh, we're building a house, so let's build a car parking space as well. I think generally our attitudes are starting to realise the benefits of travelling actively more. And I think that is a slow process, and behaviour change takes time, but I think we are slowly getting there. But we need a lot more work to do for sure. Yeah.
Good, excellent. Just one question, a quick one. Tony Waterson was asking, what does tactical urbanism mean? Some of us on the panel may know that, a lot of us may, but Sylvia, tactical urbanism in 20 words.
Pop-up urbanism without really, without asphalt or without, how you say in English, concrete. That's
great.
What we call tactical urbanism. We've got a big trouble with tactical urbanism and greening because of the maintenance of the green. Because of course you put the plants in the pots, so you don't create a proper pouring system. And then we are having issues with the people from parks in Barcelona that they complain. Of course, the maintenance of the tactical green urbanism, it's more difficult for them because it's not automatic now. So we are also trying to face this, to solve these problems, or creating half automatic systems, but not really. So yeah, but the thing with tactical urbanism means pop-up urbanism, things that you can just move from one place to the other, paint, and then community engagement. That's the best, because people need to get the new space from theirs, and I think that's the bit.
For Tony as well, I've only been in Sustrans 4.5 years, and I heard this term being used, and I had the exact same question. You asked the exact same question you did, but essentially, if you wanted to be more basic about it, it is these temporary measures, whether it's a bunch of traffic cones sealing off a part of a street, whether it's the kind of pop-up planters, or other little temporary structures, and as Sylvia says, it's a very good way of trying something out without committing, concrete, asphalt, digging, putting soil and plants in, but the idea being that it can change around almost overnight. So lots and lots of questions. I've got a comment on housing from Jenny Raggett, who's coordinator of Transport for New Homes. And she said, our research shows that future lifestyles are being built around the car. The government's planning reforms are an opportunity to address this. And Jenny, I think all of us on the panel couldn't agree more. We certainly would hope that that lifestyles aren't built around the car. I think I'll just direct people to, as well, there's been an excellent report by Transport for the Quality of Life, planning for less car use, which is absolutely superb, put out along with Friends of the Earth a couple of years ago. Also in Sustrans, we have a policy position basically saying that how active travel could help, and building in active travel infrastructure in areas of housing could actually help tackle the housing crisis, because the point being that you can have slightly higher densities with less dependence on cars. It is important though, with all those things, again, going back to our 20-minute neighbourhood idea, that you don't just increase densities without good quality green space and amenities. Otherwise, it's worse. Just another one here. If we can, and thank you, Juliana has shared that for everybody. So there's just so many questions here. I'm just going to take this one here. And maybe we should do like the Spanish version where you put a question mark before as well as at the end, because there's a lot of kind of lengthy statements that sometimes have a question mark on the end and sometimes don't. This is a question. Any comments from the panel on bringing jobs and employment within the 20-minute neighbourhood? And I'm thinking along the lines of supply of jobs available locally, levels of wages available locally, and skill levels of the local population. Generally, if we want higher level jobs to pay more, they might need to travel further afield, assuming levels of work from home decrease in the future. So implications for economic development departments or councils to, that's kind of a question. What about jobs locally? I can start on that because it's something, again, that I've looked at a number of policy areas around that. And go back to what I was saying in my presentation about certainly what we're seeing in Scotland is that there's a growing interest in working from home. And of course, it won't be all professions. It'll be certain roles. But and this move, I think there is a widespread understanding that there will be a hybrid working from home, working from the office, and it does create questions for us. But one of the elements of that would be work hubs within your 20-minute neighbourhood, or even within a sort of a 15-minute cycle of where you live. So the idea would be that yes, you're not doing the mass journey into the city, but that you have access to employment opportunities locally, and that would kind of be so work hubs in multi-use spaces would be one of the elements of that. But of course, it's not going to work for all professions and all jobs. And just seeing, we have talked about employment. And this is a very important one from Jacqueline Saunders here. The majority of journeys made by disabled people are on foot, and they make the majority of journeys up to 1 mile. But I'm just bringing in a question on that. We have, of course, talked about everything is a handy 10-minute walk, 20-minute return walk, 15-minute. Could the rest of the panel comment on inclusivity and the importance of how do we make the 20-minute neighbourhood work for people who have mobility difficulties, who need access to a car, whether it's through Blue Badge or just different generations. Tim, would you like to start?
Yeah, so definitely. So we work with the Design Council on the guide, and they have their inclusive design principles, and that's something that's really important for the 20-minute neighbourhood. Is we can't think of designing places for just able-bodied people walking that 20-minute distance. That's not going to be the same for everybody, certainly. So it is about creating our streets for everyone, making sure that they're accessible. So it's definitely going back to what Sylvia said, is working with the community, learning what they need, and definitely that community engagement is that's definitely a key principle to make this happen and to make it a success, definitely. So it's really important.
Thanks, Tim. And I don't know, Sylvia or Dan, do you have anything else to add on that point?
Well, just making clear, in Barcelona it's very important, and already for many years, I think more than 20 years, all the streets must be accessible, not only for wheelchairs, but also for blind people. And then all the street lights, the traffic lights, sorry, they have sound also for for the blind people, and you've got also the guided pavement everywhere. So it's, yeah, of course, it's really, really important to be accessible 100% and inclusive for all ages, also not only for male of 30, 50-year-old.
Of course, yes, indeed. Some of us
yeah,
have been reading our Caroline Theatre. Dan, sorry.
That's right, just jumping very quickly. So there's some work's going on at the moment about providing accessibility information on buses and bus stops, and trying to improve the data that sits behind that. So I think there is some work trying to make sure that, you know, the data that comes out shows actually, you know, is there a easy access bus, information like that, and that's going to start filtering downstream to users. So it'll be easy to model that using software and things like that in the future. As well, but it's all about design, as everyone said so far. It's ensuring that, you know, paths are wide enough, you know, there's not street litter in the way and things like that get in the way of people. So yeah, it all comes into that basically.
Great, thanks for that, Dan. And then we've got another question here. Several urban thinkers have reflected on potential spatial inequalities. So this is kind of furthering that point. And whether 15-minute centres could exacerbate these. So I suppose the question is, could they worsen social divides and widening inequalities between poorer and richer districts? Thoughts on that? Sylvia?
Well, as I mentioned, I think mixture of uses, it's the main point to get also this equal districts and neighbors. I think all the neighbors must have all the services, but all the services, of course, must be also good quality. So it's not that you put worse quality in a neighbor that is poor, but better quality. In fact, in some neighbors in Barcelona, we are getting more high quality public schools, and they are not the richest neighbors, but the poorest neighbors. And then everyone that is coming to live here, they are using more and more public school because it's good quality. So I think it's not something to do with the 15 minutes city.
Great. Tim or Dan, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think it's definitely, you don't want to make wealthy, healthy neighborhoods richer and healthier. You want to address those areas of highest deprivation first. So I think when you're thinking about the 20-minute neighborhood, it's definitely addressing those inequalities, getting to the root of those problems at the very start, and not improving already wealthier areas, because that's not the principle of the 20-minute. We want to make places accessible for everyone. But it is that idea of gentrification. It is a challenge, definitely.
It's interesting. So in a study we did in St. Louis, when looked at walkability of areas of St. Louis, they found that the places that scored worst were the places that had lower employment rates and things like. Sometimes these are the places that are forgotten about. There's no investment makers, they don't make complaints or anything like that. So the rich places kind of, you know, get better because everyone's, you know, complaining, all gentrified and wants, you know, everything to be perfect outside, but the poorer places do get forgotten about. So I think this is quite an important thing to look at. And things like, you know, the indexes of multiple deprivation and things like that done at the moment can highlight these areas where investment is needed and sought. And I think that's something that is done luckily in England, Wales and Scotland, and that's something that should be maybe more attention should be paid to for where investment should be done to improve access, basically.
Great, yeah, Dan, and just adding to that point, I know in Sustrans in Scotland, we actually a couple of years ago did a piece of research looking at, it was a very sad mapping exercise, mapping areas on the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation with car collisions and where children were killed or seriously injured or injured in traffic collisions, and children on foot or traveling on foot or by bike. And in the most deprived areas, they were 3 times as likely to be injured, seriously injured or killed as children in the top quintile. So it's just something that we see again and again. And of course, that's very often down to the kind of severance of areas. And so it is a really, really important point. Just another question here then from Daryl Chen, partner and head of urban at Hawkins Brown. He feels that the 15 minute is anti-urban and does a disservice to the very idea of a city. He recently wrote that the 15-minute city forgets the very dynamics that make cities successful and attractive as places of personal opportunity and fulfillment. Discuss in, and I will just add, discuss in 3.5 minutes. I think the point about this, we're talking about the kind of vibrancy of cities and places of kind of exchanging ideas and innovation and cross-fertilization and all that great stuff that we love in exciting cities. Does the 15-minute neighbourhood or 20-minute neighbourhood, does that go against that? I'm going to go to the vibrant city, the most vibrant city on the panel, Sylvia, to start.
Yeah, well, for me, 15 minutes or 20-minute city means people are autonomous, or I don't know the English word, but they are able of moving them by themselves, and they don't need some other person to bring them or some other vehicle to bring them. So I really don't see this point that this person is pointing out.
Tim, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with Sylvia. I think the whole idea of the 20-minute neighbourhood and the 15-minute city, it is, I don't think it's anti-urban. I think it's promoting that vitality of cities, and yeah, I wouldn't say it's anti-urban at all. It's all about, yeah, creating exciting, vibrant, attractive places to live in. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think, you know, it gives you the option to do stuff on your doorstep if you want to, but it doesn't exclude you going further afield if you needed to. But it's ensuring that you have access to green spaces, communities on your doorstep. You don't need to use the car, but you're in a connected city, so you may look at a large view saying actually you can go to other parts of the city to see friends or socialise, but actually to access essential services, you don't need to do that. It's all there and applicable locally.
Yeah, and I'd certainly agree with that. And living in a place like Edinburgh, which, you know, yes, I'm in a neighbourhood, it's a very vibrant neighbourhood, but a short hop on the bike and over a few hills, and I'm in another vibrant neighbourhood, you know, so it can be done. And I think it's thinking differently about accessibility, and certainly I think coming out of lockdown or semi-lockdown for whatever it is, 14 months now, we are in no way advocating, I think we'd be fair to say, advocating that we all stay in our little local area, you know, that kind of a message at this point in time would not land well. But I think there is the concept about what do you have within a short walk? Do you need to jump in a car? Do you really need to jump in a car? And what can you get to within a slightly wider range? And very often, as we know with many of these things, Dan will agree with me on this, things are often a lot quicker and nearer than you think. There are so many questions, and I'm just going to get one last question. We've got a minute, and then I just want to say thanks to everyone. Just one last question from a point of clarification. There seems to be a difference in the base map interpretation of 20-minute cities involving public transport rather than walking. Can you just quickly address that?
Yeah, no, certainly. So it all comes down to destinations again that I mentioned a moment ago. So some of our things we looked at walking access to, but if you looked at just walking access to secondary schools, then regions would perform really badly. So we appreciate that actually, you know, school service and things like that are really important about getting people to secondary schools. So we've done a mixture of it. And you know, what we've done is by no means the best way. You know, we've left some very important destinations out there, but it's made to spark conversation and debate amongst other cities and regions.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that. So once again, I just want to say thanks very much to all the panelists, Tim Emery from the Town and Country Planning Association, to Silvia Casoran from Barcelona, Dan Saunders from Basemap, and just to remind you that Basemap sponsored this event. Thanks everybody for coming in, and thanks for all those questions, and I'm so sorry I wasn't able to get to all of them, or even a fraction of them, but I hope we'll have ways of being able to post information. Do keep in touch and follow up, and yes, let's keep this conversation going. So thank you.